All right, good evening, everyone who's with us. Thank you for joining us. This is the Housing and Community Development Act Committee meeting for Wednesday, December 11th, 2019. I'm calling the meeting to order. While we do not have a full quorum present, oh yeah, we do. No, we do.
We do.
Quorum present. We are going to be not entertaining, but we're going to be listening to informational and question and answer presentations, for lack of a better description, with regard to a number of applications for community development block grant funding, and we will not be actually taking any action on the items this evening. So with that, we do have a series of applications. There are 10 applications. We do have a couple of our staff members here present to answer questions for us. So I'm just going to kind of run down the list and see what items we might have questions on. The first one is the Certificate of Rehabilitation Program. So do we have any questions on that? Good evening, Ms. Hawk. Thank you for being here with us. One question I did have was with regard to the number served, and you might not know this, it might be kind of getting ahead of the curve a little bit here, but I'm hopeful that going forward with our automatic expungement for youth arrests, that might free up the need for some of these. Do you know if you have any sense of whether that might be a future savings as far as number required to be served?
I honestly don't have an answer for that.
That's totally fine.
Sorry.
And then,
it's
again,
something we can definitely look into.
Yeah, it's kind of a prospective, it's more of a thought, because I do know that we have a good number being served. And a lot of that also ties into the next item on the list, which is the Mayor's Summer Youth Employment Program. And I see that we served, I think, in the neighborhood of 1,100 last year.
Workers?
Yeah.
We had just over 600, I believe.
Okay, so okay, 600 employees?
Correct.
Okay. And most of those come through the job fair, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Which is a great event. I've stopped in there.
It's amazing.
Really, really exciting. And just to see the young people, the energy that goes into it from both the employers and the kids. It's, I should say youth, they're not all, they're still kids, I suppose, but great program and very effective. Do we have any questions on that program?
No.
Okay.
I have one quick question. Over time, we always hear that Great America will hire as many as we can get there. Is that still the case?
So Great America does still hire. They will hire as many people as we can kind of get up there.
Right.
But they don't do it through the job fair anymore.
Oh.
They do their own hiring, and kids now get to Great America on their own.
Okay.
Okay.
They do their own separate kind of job fair up there.
Okay. Do they offer any type of transportation? If kids take the Kenosha line, do they offer any type of shuttle or bus service if they took it up there and then went from whatever the station is that's closest there over to Great America?
So I don't know about the station there, but I do know that they will sometimes, depending on the number of employees they have in an area, they will sometimes coordinate transportation for
Okay.
them.
Okay.
Okay.
Or at least they have done that in the past.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Can you provide any clarification where in 2019 the request was 30,000, but only 23,000 was the difference? Actually, you know what? Never mind. I'm looking at this incorrectly.
All good?
No.
Okay, thanks. Okay, Ms. Hawk, do you have any others that are on that list of 10, or are those the only two?
Those are the only.
Okay, thanks for being here, and
Thank you.
we'll talk to you later. Next on the list is the target area graffiti removal. That is a every year application. I think it's definitely an important priority, and the work that gets done is very quick, very effective, and very efficient from my perspective. I know that when I call something in, people on my neighborhood call things in, it seems to get very promptly addressed. So I think that one's pretty self-explanatory. Ms. Biggs, thank you for joining us as well. We also have a couple of alley paving projects on the list. Could you just very, very briefly tell us about those two alley pavings?
Yes, the first, let me see what we're gonna get in. The alley paving that is north of Nathaniel and East McDaniel is a smaller T-shaped alley where we have gotten some complaints. Typically, we rotate which ward we're applying for alley improvements on, and so this year we are recommending second ward alleys. The second alley is a larger alley, the alley north of Dempster and east of Dewey. That's an H-shaped alley, it's considerably more money. This one is actually a higher priority for the staff. We get a lot more maintenance problems there, we've struggled to keep it graded. So although it is more money, it is the staff preference that we would recommend this alley first. The other issue that we have with this, the smaller alley is that it's part of an area where the CDBG low mod percentages have fluctuated. And so we are seeking to contact HUD and we're doing a survey to get, is there a correct percentage of residents that it would meet that even though it's outside the area? And we do think we can ultimately be successful, but we won't really know until HUD decides to respond
Okay.
on their schedule.
I know that they're totally fully staffed and they don't have any issues with time limits. Yeah, okay.
On that, we submitted information to HUD. They wanted, I guess, a little bit reformatted and to be assured that we checked one of the sources, which I think was pretty well explained in the email, but we will make sure. They have to approve any survey before we do it, and if they don't approve the methodology, then it's no good if we do it and they go, oh, it's no good. But what I have to make sure they understand, which I thought was clear, was we are not projecting, they're all worried about the margin of error if you, or the plus or minus when you do a survey of a part of the population and then make projections. And what we do in a case of an alley is we simply use the same people who would pay the special assessment if the alley were to be done through the special assessment. So it's the immediate need, so we have to get everybody to respond basically, and we have a resident who has said she'll go door to door and hand out forms. So it's kind of, I think they're having a little bit of difficulty understanding exactly our methodology, because they're like, I'm not quite sure, but we'll get it cleared up.
Okay. So it sounds like you have people on the ground that are very willing and
Yes,
interested
yes.
in getting it.
Laura, you said this is an H-shaped alley?
The larger one is more of an H-shaped alley.
Yeah.
And so that's why it's more expensive, it's just
Right.
more legs to it. We usually want to do the entire system at once because when we're putting in drainage, we have to do the underground connections. It gets really weird if we leave out parts of it.
And it's really hard to get the grader in there, right, to the middle part of the H.
Yes.
Can't they even get it? Can't picture it, okay, all right, yeah.
They manage it, it's
Yeah.
just, it has been a problem for the maintenance staff. More of a problem than the other one, although all unimproved alleys are issues.
Right, yeah, even the T ones are challenging sometimes. Okay, that makes sense. Also on the list, we have the Butler Park drainage and lighting improvements, or renovations rather.
Yes.
And that's one of our parks in need on that needs list, is that correct?
Yes, yes, the parks along the canal experience flooding. We actually have any number of parks that experience flooding. What's concerning about Butler Park is that some of the flooding is in landscaped areas that are bordering private property, and the flooding is spanning both the park and the private property. So for that reason, we're recommending this. We would also address flooding along the pathway, and we would put in here to do energy efficiency upgrades on the lighting, just changing out the fixtures from the high pressure sodium to LED.
Okay. All right, thank you. I think think those are the only ones on your list, right?
This is very efficient way for you to
Okay.
go through this list. Thank
So
you.
thank you for being here, I appreciate your time. Okay, and next is targeted enforcement, targeted code enforcement. Largely intuitive, but the staff member who ordinarily would be here is actually out of town tonight, so
Right.
he can't be here to join us, but again, we see it every year.
Right.
Anything, Ms. Flax, that you're aware of that's changed, or is it just, you know, the continuing need? as
Well,
usual?
one thing that is in process is really getting the new database. For many, many years, the database that they've been using for code enforcement is an old Access database that was, exactly, was
Yeah.
designed, I don't know, back before I arrived
Oh,
in
gosh.
2006. And there are many things that it does not allow us to do to really make the program more efficient. That I talked about with Carl, I talked about with Ike, and I've talked about things like, the whole way we look at code enforcement is we look at areas that are low-income housing where we have significantly more violations than in general. So that's how we determine where you put your CDBG. And our problem is, we know intuitively, and if we sort through all of the handwritten reports, how many violations, but we can't easily pull reports and show comparisons of improvement and things like that, nor can we set up things like, right now in the CDBG target area, we have inspections more frequently, roughly every third year versus a 5-year, and of course, every complaint is inspected. But there are landlords in the CDBG target area that are doing great jobs maintaining their property, and why should they be inspected more frequently if they are? So we want to become more efficient and be able to spend our time really with the landlords or properties that there are problems. And we're gonna get to that with the new database.
Okay, great.
But it was just transitioning this fall, so.
Good, okay,
And that came up when we were working on the landlord
right.
Yep.
ordinance, and
Mhm.
as part of that conversation on the frequency and availability of the inspections. Okay, and that leads us nicely, did you have a question?
Well, I guess, yes, Sarah, I guess, just because how many complaints, do most of the complaints come in via 311, or is that, and then get forwarded on, or?
A lot of them do come in through 311, yeah.
Yeah, and I just have no sense of the volume of this, how many, like, would you have any sense? I'm just curious.
And the funny thing is, of course, we report those numbers to HUD every year in their database, but do I have them in my head? No. It is really, it is a significant number. I really hazard to guess, but I think it's someplace around, it can fluctuate from maybe 250 to 500 a year.
And of those 250 to 500, most of them do end up being in CDBG eligible areas? Or do they only get forwarded to you if they are?
Well, they only get paid for with CDBG if they are in a CDBG area, because the inspectors
Right,
have to do time and activity tracking
right.
as required. And of course, the other thing that goes into the time and activity tracking is their time, if they're doing CDBG courses, cases in front of adjudication or in court or things like that. So that's a very important part of the way we have to show eligibility of expenses. So we have to define what area we're focusing on and why we're focusing on it, what we're trying to accomplish, and we also have to show that we're making other efforts in the CDBG target area to improve conditions. So it pretty much, it very much overlaps with our low and moderate income areas where we're putting our CDBG for alleys and where we're doing most of our housing rehab. So it's not supposed to be just go throw the book at people. And we also refer property owners to the CDBG rehab program.
Which is a perfect segue into the next item on the agenda, which is the CDBG rehab program,
Yeah.
the Housing Rehab Administration and Loan Fund. because we're solutions oriented and we don't just find the problems, but we try to find ways for people to resolve the problems. And that, of course, is a program to help address the actual work that needs to be done in housing. Again, it's fairly self-explanatory. Do we have any questions from Ms. Fox?
I did. So this is the one I was thinking of. Is there a particular difference between the 2019 request and then the estimated expenses?
What happens with the 2019 expenses, we are doing our best to figure out what we're gonna come in at, so that's what we've got in the budget. Gary Gertis, who used to head this program, is not heading it. It's transitioned to being under me. So I guess one could claim that's an efficiency in one way. Because my time's already, in many cases, being built. But you know, we do have, you know, what we do is we build in staffing costs and all of that stuff. And so the estimate is what we think if we are fully staffed and things like that, we would expend. Now, this year, because of other changes, we've had code enforcement, turnover in code enforcement inspectors, and Scott Williams, who is our rehab specialist, is also a code inspector. So he has picked up some of that and taken some of his time away from CDBG. I mean, he's been doing some code enforcement, gets pulled under that. And so that's one of the strengths of having really strong staff who can do both, but it makes it, you know, we are not getting as much rehab done as we might, and that's why you'll see our numbers are down, going to be down a little bit this year in completed ones, not in ones that are undertaken, but in completed ones. The other thing that we did find is we're seeing a lot more people who are not income eligible, but need help, and that's something we know from our housing planning, and that's something we're trying to look at and how do we address that in the housing plan. It's just, there are needs out there that we can't touch because they're over 80% of area median. It's really hard to be a homeowner of a standalone property at 80% of area median and below. But many of the people who we help are seniors who are living on Social Security and frequently very little else, and so it's critical to be able to keep them in their homes.
I have a question also, and it is, I'm a little confused on the allocation of these funds in the sense that we're giving into the code enforcement 375, which is to find the violations or the issues, and only 200 or thereabouts to fix these problems.
I'll explain that too.
And one is 55%, which means that we're at about 750,000 on the code enforcement, and it's 100% on the repairs.
Right.
So I'm a little confused on the allocation of those two.
So code enforcement, only part of it is, it's the CDBG targeted code enforcement is a portion of the overall property standards budget. So the names are a little confusing. So when you look at code enforcement, the total budget for property standards inspections is much larger. So that's why it's the 55% of the total budget. So the rest of it is paid for by general fund.
Then that brings another question.
Yeah.
It is that if it is confusing to us, what is it to the rest of the residents of Evanston? They probably will not be able to understand what we're talking about, right?
Well, that can be a problem with almost everything CDBG, sadly, but no, I think that many of our people, the residents of especially our area where we do targeted code enforcement, are familiar with being part of the CDBG target area and actually know, in some cases, it can be a resource and help for them. But it is confusing. We have the program that does all of our code inspections, or all of our property standards inspections, shall we say, but over 55% of our actual city resources are spent in the CDBG target area generally, but we can't always allocate enough to pay for whatever proportionate. So it's a balancing act between what we can choose to put against it for CDBG and how much we pick up from the general fund.
But you're right, it is
Yeah.
confusing.
Yeah, it is very confusing. Housing rehab is frankly even more confusing, because what we're asking for this year in that 225,000 is only for the administration portion of the program. There is another source of funding for the actual rehabs, and that is the revolving loan. And we're not asking for any additional allocation of entitlement of new money, because we have enough in the revolving loan fund right now, and unspent money that was allocated to recapitalize the loan fund from 2019. So there will be, there
If I can ask a
are.
question, so
No,
this-
go
No, no,
ahead.
no,
it's
that's what we're here
It
for.
helps all of us.
So, these funds are available because they are not being given then. And that tells me something is off, because there is tons of need to help people, especially on CDBG target areas. So how come it's so much available that we're not giving any consideration to new funds to be allocated
Well,
for
we
that
are
fund?
allocating it all the time. What happens is when somebody,
back.
it comes back and so, there are some
But
years.
the idea will be that there is no money in that pile, that it's always going out, right? Because the need is immense.
Well, we always want to have a balance so we can continue to keep an even flow of work. All of our CDBG housing rehab projects are managed by the rehab specialist. And there's a reason for that, and that is the requirements for federal compliance, which are astounding. We have to make sure that we've looked for lead-based paint, and we have to remediate if it's there. We have to follow all the bidding requirements. Most of us, if we need something done on our house, we call a bunch of contractors and we ask them each for a bid, and we choose it. Well, you can't do that with CDBG, or if you do, you'll get in trouble. You have to have a very clearly written scope of work and have people bid on it and get 3 or more comparable bids. It is not something that most of the people we help have the capacity to do on their own without just making themselves crazy. We had, when Grant Farrar first joined, and we were working on some of the documents, and he was like, why don't we just give them loans? And we had to explain this to him, because it's the same thing, why can't we just give them loans? Experiences when there are communities that have done that, they end up giving a lot of funds back, because when they are monitored, they have not done things. There have to be environmental reviews. It's not a true, you're a realtor, when there's a phase 1 and a phase 2, it's not
Sure.
that. But we have to go through this whole process of showing that there are no above ground exploding tanks or anything like that. I mean, it's sometimes the reason things that are done with federal funds cost so much is because there is so much stuff we are required to do. And so that is just, nobody solved how to make it more efficient, really.
Is that, Sarah, why it says here the CDBG housing rehab projects are funded by zero interest loans then?
They are funded by zero interest loans in most cases, because the people, and we do look at this, we underwrite them, and they literally do not have the cash flow to pay back a loan. In many cases, they're barely balancing getting their, property taxes and then just their living expenses. So if they have the capacity, then they generally aren't. We try to prioritize based on need and urgency. So right now, for example, we're working on a house with a failed sewer lateral. Well, if we don't fix it pretty quickly, the house will have to be shut down because you have sanitation problems. So there are a lot of different factors that come into trying to manage this program. It's not easy at all. And, if I could simplify parts of it, I would love to. I mean, when we are fixing stuff that is basically within an existing house, to me, going through a process that shows we haven't affected sole source aquifers and all sorts of other things is really unnecessary, but that's not my choice to not do it. In fact, when we were monitored a little over 5 years ago, I think it was, one of the things we got dinged on was some of the environmental reviews were not as thorough as they should have been. So, you know, I don't really have a better explanation. It's the judge.
Thank you.
It's the government.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and along these lines, let's skip economic development for a moment and go straight to the administration and planning application. And kind of to your point, Hugo, they contemplate that it's going to take a lot of staff time and cost a lot to manage and do all this, so they let us allocate a big chunk of money for the administration, yeah.
Sure.
So, you know, that is also kind of built into the mix here as well, that they, you know, that's kind of presumed from that piece of it.
CDBG is known as the single most complicated grant program the federal government has because it covers so many things and is used in so many different ways. It has so many requirements.
Right, the stipulations are pretty steep.
Yeah.
I like that.
Do we have any questions on the administration planning part of it? Okay, so let's go back to economic development.
If you don't mind, I
No,
do
you-
have a quick question.
Oh,
So
sorry.
wouldn't there be any redundancies then? Because we have the allocation of the 20% of the grant for administration. Is there any redundancy on any of the other requests into that 20%? Because for what you're telling me, there is administrative issues already on other requests, other portions, and then we have it also on the 20%. So it's a lot of money. And the only reason why is that of concern to me is because it's less money that goes out to the actual
Projects and
families that
activities.
need it, or the
Absolutely.
individuals in our community that will need those funds.
Absolutely. There is very little duplication. There will be a little now that I've taken over, but again, we do time and activity tracking, so we don't draw it if it isn't spent. And if it isn't spent, if I don't allocate any of my time, I actually can allocate my time to either CDBG admin or housing rehab admin. That's a flexibility. And as long as I have the CDBG admin, I will allocate it to that. Because that just is, you know. However, we're still budgeting, we're budgeting because if and when, you know, Gary is working on a different basis, he's working remotely on our other stuff, we may at some point transition it back if we hire a building official in that exact position. So we tend to budget based on how the program is structured, and then, but we don't draw down expenses. We can't draw down the money for that unless the staff work on it. Now, Scott's position is a full-time position, even though he was, and Chris Renard, who is the customer service person who handles the housing rehab program, puts approximately 60%, sometimes a little more of her time against that. And then there are some other expenses, like when we, you know, releasing mortgages or, you know, all that kind of stuff, or we have to do things like periodically we have somebody who wants to refi their first mortgage to maybe get there, and we do subordinations and that kind of stuff. So the time, the other thing that Chris spends a lot of time on, we have to every year check to make sure that the people are still living in their homes and it's their primary, I mean, there is again a lot of compliance. And I will be frank, one of the reasons, in addition to our people we're helping generally not having the ability to pay debt service, one of the other challenges is when we do have some amortizing loans, and then sometimes what we end up doing is chasing people who can't afford the debt service, and then sometimes we have to do modifications to paperwork because, and we went through some modifications on some other loans, because if they aren't able to make payments, then when HUD looks at our loan, they say, why do you have a loan that isn't in compliance with your terms? Well, that's a good question, right? And so there are some efforts that have to be made sometimes to reconsider those. And those, when we do that, those go to the an internal loan committee, and if they are something that is not within our standard protocol, like we had some very old loans, we bring it to the committee, because that's just something we feel we need to do. We have some loans, believe it or not, that were written in, I think the earliest one we still have is 1979. You know, and you just don't expect to have loans that long.
Didn't we just restructure a couple of them?
Yes.
Yeah, because
Yes.
they were so, yes.
Yeah, they had really unusual terms that were very typical of
Outdated,
the
yeah.
late 70s when interest rates were sky high, and it was just weird.
And do we have the ability to convert those loans into forgivable grants?
We could. The challenge we run into if we do that is then every year we have to allocate probably 200,000 more of our entitlement to
That program?
exactly.
To those
So
funds.
that's why the city's had a revolving loan fund for a very long time. And that's why, because then it kind of helps continue to fund the program in the future. So what happens is when somebody sells the property, or frequently just when the owner passes away, the city recoups the loan at that point. But they have not paid interest, and they don't pay, you know, so technically the city is losing money on the money, but that's not the primary point. The point
Right.
is to help them and not to. And right now, we're writing a lot more $50,000 loans. That's our cap normally for a single family. And even with that, we're not able to do everything that needs, to make it fully, we deal with the greatest needs, but, you know, we're not doing things, at one point, we were doing more sprucing up, now we're doing an awful lot of just
More
really,
environmental cleaning
really
and stuff
essential
like that, right?
things, you
Yeah,
know.
would make sense, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we have another property, for example, that was a house that was converted to a two-flat many years ago, and it's an owner-occupied two-flat, and those get treated as single-family in terms of qualifying the owner as eligible. We don't have to have the other unit income eligible under CDBG rules, which is nice, because then if they can get higher than what is fair market value for somebody at 80% of area median, they can maybe make a little bit more income. But in this case, the stairway to the second floor unit is like totally structurally unsound, so guess what? They can't do anything, you know.
Until that is
Right,
correct.
right, so
Okay.
we've got some, we have some very interesting challenges, and we work very closely with the health department when they find houses with problems.
Thank you.
So in looking at the budget on page 58, would you be able to explain the ones that nearly doubled from the projected to the requesting for 2020, like printing went from 0 to 458, office supplies 35 to 400.
We have pretty
Membership dues?
standard things we put in, and they don't necessarily get used all the time. Some years we print brochures, some years we don't. We plug those in, and to try to figure out exactly where we are in a given year. Just, yeah.
And then like with the membership dues, is it like a bi-annual thing or pay every other year?
I'm sorry, I didn't.
Sorry, so for
Membership dues.
the membership dues, that also jumped from like 0 to 200? Or training and travel went from 50 to 1,000? Is it just?
Sometimes that, we budgeted that, the
Mhm.
same amount for 2019, but we're showing what was actually used, or what we think is gonna be used. So we're projecting being below what we estimated the total budget for 2019 because of some of the reductions in staffing also means they're doing less training and stuff like that.
Okay.
It also sometimes depends on what trainings come up. There are a bunch of lead-based paint trainings again, and so one year, for example, Scott Williams went to I think it was a 3-day thing out of state, you know, and it was a HUD training, but it was in Milwaukee or something like that. So those costs are frequently just linked to, we budget for it, so if the opportunity comes up, if it doesn't get taken, doesn't get spent and can't be drawn down, so. And then it returns to the fund, and if we actually had, I mean, if, for example, we had, say the revolving loan ran out, if we had unspent and we were confident we didn't need all of the admin for administering the program, we can then use it for projects too, so we have that flexibility. We would come back to the committee and tell you that, but, you know, we could do that if we needed to.
Thank you for that.
It is a crazy complicated
Yeah.
business though. It's just like mind-boggling sometimes.
And economic development has an application this year, they didn't apply last year. Alderman Nguyen and myself happen to be on the economic development committee, so we have an unfair advantage of knowing exactly what the committee's doing. But you know, over the past few years, we've, you know, it references things, for example, like the facade improvement program, which is actually something that we've gotten away from doing.
Right.
And it's really transitioned more towards supporting entrepreneurship, supporting, you know, small, really small, these are like micro grants for startup businesses. Typically, the applicant will go through a program to, you know, learn how to run a business, basically. I'm oversimplifying a bit, but.
How to do a business plan.
Right.
How to-
And they're
financing.
fairly sophisticated. We had a contract with one group that was putting on these programs. It was weeks and weeks long, and they, you know, graduated the participants and I guess in a sense certified them for having completed that. And then a number of them applied for these types of grants, and you know, they tend to be very small, things like, you know, a couple to a few $1,000s. It might be to get a computer or get a license or a certification from the state. Things that, you know, if you don't have the cash and you don't have the couple of $1,000s to get the certification from the state, you might have the skills and the ability, but you don't have the money to pay for that certification or that next level of training. So that's where that's been going, and they're looking for more money to I guess, Mr. Zalmazak submitted this, looking to make that, you know, more robust and provide more opportunities. And, you know, again, this is the job training and access to opportunities is, I think it's a priority for the whole community, so.
And we've been doing this long enough so that we now are aware of success stories that are really remarkable for really relatively small investment has launched people into their own business in really surprising ways. I mean, the creativity of these entrepreneurs is really remarkable.
Right.
And one of the programs is, I think it was 16 weeks long. You know,
That sounds about right.
Yeah, with, you know, each week being a lot of detail in terms of even taking a really good idea that they might be working on and being somewhat successful with, and learning all of, you know, about finance, writing a business plan, how do you approach a bank,
Insurance, workers' comp,
insurance,
taxes,
all
accounting,
those things.
yes.
That,
So
but
these-
putting it together in a program so that by the time you're finished with it, you really have a very comprehensive understanding of what you need to do in order to be up and running, and so that you won't run into a regulatory problem that you never planned for or didn't expect.
Yeah, and one of the things is HUD has this interesting category called micro-enterprise assistance, which is, a micro-enterprise is, in HUD's terms, is a business that has no more than 5 employees, including the owner. And if the owner or ownership itself qualifies as low and moderate income, then you have almost none, you don't have these crazy requirements like for every $35,000 that somebody gets, you have to create a lot of job and things like that. And one of the interesting things is the most successful example of supporting one of these micro enterprises that we have is when we did CDGR money to help Ward 8, and we gave them a business loan, and that was a remarkable thing. But I think the micro enterprise assistance, whether it is technical assistance or whether it's small grants or loans, is definitely the primary thing that economic development is looking for. There may be an opportunity, there have been on occasion where we've put larger loans that are actually amortizing loans and have debt service into, for example, Good to Go Jamaican restaurant for their build out. One of the things that CDBG can do is it can be used for things that TIF and some other funds can't be used for. It can be used for equipment, it can be used as startup capital, and so there are situations where we've layered it in with TIF for economic development money because those monies can't be used for the same thing. And we can do creative things, and this is how we fund it. We give a little relief fund when they have to start paying the CDBG loans, so when it's a startup in a location, they get a little bit of relief until they start building some business. So we don't do a lot of economic development funding with CDBG, but we found it beneficial to have something available. And so projects come forward throughout the year and go through economic development. And Alderman Rainey had said she wanted them to come back to this committee too. I think we can discuss if there's going to be any change to that process. It makes it cumbersome if somebody has to go to multiple committees. It makes it really crazy. Maybe we could have a joint one if it were necessary. But it's something that we have found has been important in some occasions. And we are working with one potential business in the Fifth Ward that is trying to, that could be a business that would be worth looking at and providing some help, for example.
Sorry, I just had a couple questions.
Sure.
So first of all, I'm glad that economic development applied this year, because I don't think they have in the last 5
Well,
years.
we had a balance. Whenever we have a balance, we don't bring them back for more money.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and I know, and you did the survey, which
Right.
is
Exactly.
responding to, so.
Right.
Yeah.
So I just want to be clear, where is this gonna show up on the spreadsheet? Like, is this gonna be with the 15% that's capped? Is it gonna be with those groups, or is it gonna be
For
somewhere
economic
else?
development, no,
Yeah.
it is flexible.
It can be anywhere.
Mm.
Okay,
really?
great.
It's its own funding category, so
Okay.
it's not capped.
Okay.
The only capped categories are CDBG administration, not housing rehab administration, just CDBG and public services overall. And so of the programs that we're looking at tonight, certificate of rehab, mayor's summer youth, employment, and graffiti removal fall into that category. And CDBG was designed first and foremost as what we sometimes call bricks and sticks type of funding. There are other federal programs like CSBG, which is Community Services Block Grant, and other things that are devoted to services. But those don't get done on an entitlement basis generally. Those go through the state of Illinois, and they assign whoever is the CSBG agency by geographic area, sorry. But we can spend no more than 15% of our current year grant plus 15% of the prior year program income, which is really our revolving loan repayments, on public services activities. So we always have this crazy spreadsheet that shows the max that you can spend in that category to try to figure out what we can do there. And that is our most competitive category, because that's for all of the nonprofits that we've been seeing for the programs, from the joint meeting with the mental health board and a handful of others but very important ones that don't have mental health board requests as well, like the Youth Job Center and the YWCA. All of those things fit into that category. So that's one of our biggest challenges.
When you see I'll let you ask that, but when you see this, you both have you done the spreadsheet before?
No.
Okay, so it's the first time.
First time.
It's easy and it's intuitive, but it'll add it up for you, so, it's also like hard, because it's like, there's not enough money and it's really stressful,
Yeah.
Right.
but, what we do is, each of us will do it on our own, and then email it to Sarah. So that way you kind of like, give what you really feel. Like, if you're in the group, you kind of might, change your mind or feel pressure or whatever. That gives everybody an opportunity to, kind of, submit it without pressure, I think. you will also do an average on where they come out and provide us with an average that we meet. And then we can kind of go through and work backwards from that
Right.
average. It's kind of the methodology we've
Right.
really intended.
It helps everybody kind of get a feel for where you get to think about what we're using priorities are, and then
And then
it's
see
a
what the
negotiation,
average is.
basically, right?
Right,
It's
right,
a-
Yeah, I just want to make sure I understand. So do you have any sense of how much the sort of loans were given out by economic development last year, what the ballpark number is?
The only one that was given out, actually it was earlier this year, and it actually hasn't, we haven't released the funds, is $60,000 was actually, and it wasn't a loan, it is a grant to, because they can be grants or a loan, they can be done, to the Evanston Development Cooperative. And that is when they get projects and they actually hire people who are low-income people who start doing the work to organize and build ADUs, so.
So there were no like small micro loans?
There weren't any small ones through CDBG, and I don't know the small ones that were being done through economic development that are what is more common. and
Yeah,
what
and
we're-
there were grants, I don't
Yeah.
recall any loans, but we had a
Yeah.
number of grants,
Yeah.
there were small ones, yeah.
Yeah.
And the small ones frequently are done as grants because it's sometimes not.
Right.
I mean, I think the grant, I mean, I don't think we got any of our $2,500.
That was kind of the amount that it
The
was.
small
I think
ones,
one
yeah.
of them was a little bit more, that was maybe one of the certification ones.
Right,
yeah.
But that could have been the year,
Right,
Yeah.
they were.
for a lot of years,
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
just run together, so.
And
Another-
sometimes and sometimes it's less than that, you know, sometimes it's $1,500.
Right,
Right.
right.
Yeah.
And so, to us, it doesn't seem like a lot of money, but if you are, if maybe you're working an hourly wage job and you want to do this different thing,
Right.
that's just not available, so it's an impediment to opportunity,
Oh,
so
it
it's
sounds
trying to
like
get
it's a
them.
great program.
Yeah.
It is,
Yes.
it's really.
Do you have any example in mind, right off the top of your head,
There,
of a successful one that,
well, there's the,
just curiosity?
no, there's the food, they do catering and, they do,
I'm gonna see your talk.
this is so
No,
terrible.
Oh, Jennifer's.
Jennifer's Edibles, yeah,
Edibles.
Jennifer's Edibles.
Jennifer's
That's
Edibles,
one,
yeah.
yeah.
Mhm.
They had I think they had a
Yeah.
grant from, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was from economic, I'm sure they had it.
And I can't, it's based off it, but that's my favorite because they,
Yeah.
so.
And I think.
There's a T-shirt business, and they're selling T-shirts, I think, around town. They do like, for teams and things like that. So if you're like doing
Yeah.
team T-shirts, whatever, so there was that young man who started a business doing that. There was the, again, the certification for, somebody was doing, I don't know what it's hair and,
Right.
but,
Right.
like
Sort of
cosmetology kind of stuff.
cosmetology that if
I don't know any of
they-
the words, but
Yeah, right.
it was a
It sounds
certification
like
for
a
that.
really great program.
Yeah, so it's good stuff.
Yeah.
And
Good.
that woman, she already did some, but in order to do like the next level of
yeah.
things, she had to go through a program and then get the next level of licensing from the
Licensing,
state.
exactly.
Right,
Mhm.
and then, I mean, she was also mentoring girls in the high school.
Right.
Right, who were interested in this type of business, and, I mean, she was doing,
Yeah.
it was pretty incredible.
The work
There
is
was
just
a-
amazing, so it's
Yeah.
good stuff. The other thing that we can do with CDBG is we can look, and we've talked about, and I want to work with economic development, one of the things we talk about is we have a lot of smaller contractors who need certain things. Now, one of the things, an example of if you are not an Illinois-led licensed contractor, so you don't have the licensing to do lead remediation, then we can't use you on a lot of our CDBG. Well, great, I mean, we could if somebody is a low and moderate income, small business, owner or something like that, or somebody, give them the money for the training, or maybe the first year help pay for the increased insurance costs, because
Right.
that's one of the things that you get when you get that license and you start doing lead-based paint remediation. So, we have these kind of challenges we want
We should
to.
train our own, basically grow our own.
Exactly, and that's something that I've talked off and on with economic development and others about, that I think could be really viable and could be really important, because it builds the capacity of our very small contracting businesses with the specialty that they can make money on, so.
I know one thing that in the UWEBE committee, we had talked about creating kind of reimbursement type grants for local residents to get certification as well. And granted that they completed it, then, you know, then it was completely a forgivable, you know, not loan, but it was just trying to hold them accountable for going through the certification process too. I don't know if anything ever came of
A
it.
forgivable grant or
Right.
something.
Yeah,
Right,
so if
right.
you complete it, then you,
Yeah.
yeah.
I
I
think
don't know
we,
if it went through with it though.
and that's something we can talk more internally to find out about. But one of the, Connect with Sharon Johnson probably to make sure that, you know, one of the things is we can't do job training to just anyone. It has to be connected with a micro enterprise, so it has to be somebody who's building or an entrepreneurial thing. I mean, we have to make sure it's not, we can't, under the economic development funding, just do job training. We do that type of job training under public services through Youth Job Center and things like that. I mean, so that's another thing that's very frustrating about CDBG. Sometimes the lines between the categories are somewhat obscure and very complicated to figure out what they are. And we could, for example, say a business that already exists identifies people who are low income that they are willing to train and then move into jobs they have. Now, in theory, you could then fund the training program and the business would then have to hire a certain number of those workers, those low-income workers, in order to be, and frequently we don't have businesses that are doing enough of that sort of thing to make that type of thing work out. So there are a lot of things that can be done, actually implementing them, and sometimes they're so complicated, they're, that's one of the sad parts, so.
Okay, so thank you for that. You know, the next item on the agenda is a discussion of funding priorities. I think we sort of alluded to a couple just generally in a sense, but I'd like to defer on that till we have the rest of the group with us.
Sure. Yeah.
We don't have anybody signed up for public comment. Ms. Flax, you mentioned the REBA thing. I think maybe also I'd rather wait on that until the group's together, particularly because Alderman Rainey, you know, has some
Sure.
specific concerns and,
Right.
you know, I
And
think that way we can
what
get everybody here
I'm
to talk about that.
going to try to do is have a write-up in the packet.
Okay.
I'm not sure, we're actually trying to get our own estimates, at least for some of the pieces, to see if we can provide that.
Okay.
We may not have that until the actual meeting, but
Okay.
we'll try to.
Sounds
I
good.
saw the director in the building, going towards the building.
Oh, yeah.
Building permit department the other
Okay.
day.
Okay, our next meeting is December 17th at 7 PM. Sometimes there's food. Is there going to be food?
We will actually, yes, we have light dinner, sandwiches or something brought
So if you want to get there
in,
a little bit early.
starting at
something.
6, so that, because everyone's running from work and things like that.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
it just gives everybody a chance to, it's the only one that we provide that.
Only one that we feed you, so make sure you make it for that one.
Yeah.
So, can I ask, Sarah, when are you going to ask the committee members to turn in their spreadsheets by?
Well, that's gonna be a huge challenge, because we'll get it out Friday. So, we're going to have to get it back. We'll really push it,
Well, I'm-
Tuesday morning.
No, I think that, I'm just scared that
Yeah.
if the deadline is too late, then we're gonna have
Yeah,
only about half the committee's
Yeah.
So, yeah,
averages for
historically,
Tuesday.
yeah, historically, there's always some usual suspects who show up without it filled out, which, and none of them are in the room. But yeah, so let's, you know, if we can just endeavor, and actually, the sooner you can get it to Sarah, the better, because it makes the process of doing the averages and completing that paperwork easier for her and Jessica, so.
And it's really that democratic, that whatever the average is, that's the allocation?
No,
No, no,
absolutely
no,
not,
no.
no. So what we do, is we'll each do our own,
Okay.
she'll come in and she'll show us what the averages were.
Right.
Okay,
So that way you can kind of like, you know what you did, and then you see, okay, wow, everybody else, the average is so much higher than what I did. and that will prompt a conversation or a question, or and there will be a number of them. But, you know, some years it's been very consistent and stable,
Right.
like pretty much
The
people
last
are
2
very
years,
consistent,
yeah, right.
Some years it's been very much off, and we're there for a long time talking about it. And you never know from year to year how it's gonna be.
Right. And then, I mean, I have not been here, I mean, the last 2 years I've been on the committee, it's been very, very straightforward.
Right.
But I know in past years from talking with other council members that, you know, people are advocating for particular issues that they care about.
Which is fair, you know, we
Right.
want, that's the point of having a
Right.
committee, is to make sure
Or when we
people give
see,
their input.
like, if there is a big discrepancy, sometimes someone might say, you know, how, you know, I seem to be not, perhaps I'm not understanding the program as thoroughly, especially, you know, being new on the committee, trying to understand how I may have been off in what my estimates were compared to some of the other members of the committee who've seen the program for longer periods of time.
And sometimes the opposite is true, sometimes somebody will say, no, I don't think we should do it because of this, and, you know, there's a little bit of, I can't find the right word, but having been on the committee for a long time, and a lot of the applicants are the same applicants, so, you don't want it to become too routine, so I think, you know, the conversation's important, it's a value to me, so that's, you know, I think
Right.
important to do it. So, yeah, so it's definitely not that done deal, it's more just to kind of like see what the
Jumping
actual,
off
but yeah,
place.
jumping off place, you gotta start somewhere.
Okay.
Yeah, and starting with like eight spreadsheets and like trying to line them up is hard, so starting with the average is a little easier.
And we do have some sort of guidelines that the committee has agreed to in the past. They are not absolutes, they're guidelines. For example, when we look at programs, like all the different nonprofit programs, kind of a rule of thumb is, we don't want to be more than about 30% of the budget, because we're not in a position right now where we're saying, we're not saying we're gonna fund something that is practically entirely CDBG, because what happens then is, then how do we not continue to do that? And there are some very successful programs that started out that way many years ago, including what is now the Moran Center's programs
Right.
that started
Yes.
off, like, I don't know, probably 20 or 25 years ago. But one of the differences, there have been a lot of differences in the way the federal government wants us to assess risk, which actually are almost crazy, because, you know, they want, we as staff have to go through, we have to look at their audits, we have to look at their general financial stability and try to say if we think they're a good risk, are they doing a good job, all that sort of stuff. One of the biggest challenges is, at one point, they wanted us to sort of say, well, they're economically viable and you're not going to run into problems. Well, when Illinois had no budget, and it affected all of our nonprofits, I said to HUD, I don't think there's a single nonprofit in Illinois that is stable, so I'm just putting it out there, we can't do that. But so the risk assessments that HUD is requiring, and it's not actually HUD, it's from the Office of Management and Budget, which is out of the White House, not out of any of the individual agencies, are just really counter to what it used to be, which was get grassrootsy, do everything. And so it makes it really difficult sometimes to fund. But if we have clear reasons and we say this is why we're doing, for example, you might have somebody who's in a category that there's a need, but there is no such thing as a financially stable, large nonprofit doing it, you know, so there's always
An
reasons you,
exception,
yeah.
to make an exception, yeah.
And with our nonprofits for physical improvements, for many, many years, we would have organizations coming with very small requests, and they would come year after year after year. And one of the problems with CDBG, when you're doing anything that is in a public facility, as they call it, is your construction is going to be subject to prevailing wages. And so to have that cost and all that compliance to do very small jobs is a pretty bad decision financially. Sometimes you end up doing it because it's an emergency, you know, so I mean, there can be exceptions, obviously, but we try to look at those sorts of things too. And I think there have been some years where, you know, when there's some people didn't fund something at all, say, and others did, that's when I've seen discussion about, oh, what do you know that I don't know, you know, that sort of thing. That helps.
Is there any place where these guidelines are in writing, so I can go to that?
We will, we'll
Include
cover
it
them
with-
up, we'll
yeah.
just include those,
Okay,
just so
good.
that you have,
And the percentages in each category, the spreadsheet's broken out by
Yes.
category, so we
Right.
won't have to like figure out how much is in each. That's all.
Hopefully the cells will be locked so people can't not keep to the budget. Right.
Yeah, now look to the bottom, so
That's the add up.
there's a max you can allocate, and we also had that sometimes, people will put down like, I give them everything, we're like, well, that's not very helpful, because you didn't cut things.
right, you have to, it shows when you're balanced and if you're over or under.
Yeah.
And
And if
you're
you have
over or
questions
under
about it, Sarah will.
Yeah.
in the categories, so, yeah. And ideally, we would give you a week to put your
Mhm.
things together and then more time to, and just not a year when that's happening. So,
Okay.
okay.
All right, thank you, everybody. Is there a
Thank
second?
you.
Second.
All right, all in favor of adjourning?
Aye.
All right, again, thanks for being here.
Thank you
Yeah.
for all your
For running late.
patience.